Okay, so for this next week's submittal, I'd like you guys to turn in your floor plan. So we're going to now take the reference plan that we made with the floor plans that you want to do, and then we'll go ahead and turn that into a Revit model. And so if we look at our example floor plan that I have, the one from Veritone Architecture, basically we're going to create the floor plan. But for this week, because this floor plan obviously is finished, we'll just add dimensions for the overall dimensions and then opening dimensions. We don't necessarily need all the dimensions for your interior walls. So you'll go ahead and lay it out in Revit, and then we'll get the overall dimensions and we'll put it on the title block in Revit, so that you can turn it in similar to what we did with the reference plan, but now we're going to actually start creating some content.
I'm assuming there's a fairly straightforward way to take an AutoCAD drawing and then import that into Revit.
Yeah, so if you have an AutoCAD drawing, you can actually pretty easily import it as a background so that you could draw on top of it. One of the things I've kind of experienced in the past, so I've gotten projects that we've wanted to do in Revit that we only have CAD files for. And because Revit can be kind of touchy as far as dimensions go and as far as aligning certain elements, sometimes if a line is slightly off in a CAD plan, that it won't align dimensions, and other things you won't be able to select them. So for instance, if you are doing a CAD plan and this wall is slightly off, I can't throw a dimension to this wall because it's not parallel. So that's one thing, and even if you're not using a background, that's one thing to note. So if you try to throw a dimension on and it doesn't want to snap to any of the elements in the wall, it usually means that it's not parallel. You can sometimes get, like, if you hit tab, it'll cycle through different locations to snap to, and you can get a corner, but you can't actually dimension. Like when they're parallel, Revit will find the wall entity to snap to. So so to import a CAD plan, you go to the Insert tab up top here. Then you can link a Revit file, link IFC drawing, link CAD, and coordination models and other things. So you just hit Link CAD. You can browse out. I'm sure I've got a work project I can use as an example here. Let's see. Here's one I did. Actually, this is not a plan. It doesn't matter. I'll link any Revit or any CAD background in. So here I'm just going to link in a sheet. Let's see. Let's do a plan. Actually, this is a specific project that I had issues with that. So here is, so you select the file, and before you hit OK, there are some things that you'd want to note depending on how you want to import it. So the first drop down is the preserve color. So often I'll input make it black and white. Preserve colors would just leave it as the AutoCAD layers. I also do only the visible layer. So whatever layers are turned on in the CAD file, I usually do black and white, and then you could leave it to auto detect the layers. Sometimes this doesn't work if it's particularly like a civil drawing might be drawn at a different scale. I think that they often use 120, which I think is 1 inch equals 10 feet or 1 foot equals 10 foot or something like that. And so it might import kind of weird. And then you have to go and mess with the units so that it imports correctly. It kind of throws CAD off. Then it's usually set to the positioning of origin to internal origin, or by shared coordinates. Shared coordinates is something we can get into probably next term, where you can define a Revit file. You can give its actual location using their coordinate system. And so if you link in a model, a Revit model, you do the shared coordinates, and it will, whatever model you're linking in, it can find what the coordinates are shared between the two models. But when you're inserting a CAD file, you just want to do origin to origin. Level 1, it's usually going to only allow you to place it at the level you're in. And then you can just leave this orient to view and then hit open. So if you don't see it, it's probably off in space somewhere, because that's where it lives in the CAD file. So if 00 is over here in this corner somewhere, this is where it's located. And so this is a roof plan for another project. And so it comes in pinned. So similar to like locking a layer in CAD, you can pin elements in Revit. So this CAD file comes in automatically pinned. You can see the little graphic pin there, or you can go up here to the modify tab and then pin or unpin. So you could then move it to wherever you want. And it's a good idea to pin these things so you don't inadvertently move it later on. To modify the features of a CAD file, if you go into your visibility graphics in your tool palette or under the view tab, you can modify the layers that it brings in. So it's under imported categories, and you can see that we have the name of the CAD file here. And then all the layers that you have that are in the drawing in the CAD file are available to turn off and on here. You can also, on the bottom here where it says object styles, select that to then change the layers, the line weights of the CAD file that you imported. So if you were like doing an overlay, you might want all these to be red on top of your plan, so they stand out more. And so some of the same rules too apply, like often in CAD, if it's on the 0 layer, or if it's in a block and it's by layer or by block, it might not change. But another thing for CAD files when you import them, if you're trying to figure out, either try to hide it or just find out what layer isn't turning off or on, if you select a CAD file, up in the Modify tab, you can always see what things that you can modify are for that specific element that you've selected. So if you hit Query and then pick an element, it'll actually give you the layer that it's on so that you can see and modify that layer. And so this is A, Gen M. You can hide it in view here or delete that whole layer. So if we hit hide in view, it'll hide that layer, and it keeps you in the command. You can hide that layer and turn things off and on without having to go into your the imported category. So now if we go back into the view graphics, we can see that those layers are turned off, and you can turn them back on here.
That's nice.
Yeah. And so you notice that the Gen M, I turned it to red, but it didn't turn, it wasn't showing red in the model. You'd have to open up the CAD file and find out why. It could be forced. I'm sure you guys have probably learned some AutoCAD stuff. So like you can, if you force a layer, often it does not allow you to have control over that layer because the individual lines or polylines are controlled in the properties physically and not by a layer. So, but usually just importing them in as black, that gets it done. And so here, if you draw a wall, let's say you wanted to draw walls on top of this. So if you have a floor plan and you've got the CAD file and it's just easier for you to draw on it, then you can get your wall. You can either draw a line, draw, rectangular. I prefer to do this pick line because it allows you just to pick a line, and it will add the walls just based on the lines. So it'd be pretty quick and easy to draw that way. Add your walls. Also, too, I believe if you tab, sometimes it doesn't work, and I can't always figure out why. Sometimes I think if it's not a joined element, you can tab over the line here, so we could place all the lines at once. And right now, it's telling me that I have walls on top of each other because I placed these other walls first. So it drew double walls on top of there. So we can delete those. Go back into our wall command, hit pick. Hover over a line, tab once to see if you can pick a chain of walls. And then now I placed my entire perimeter wall based on this CAD file. Obviously this wall type isn't right. This is the top of the parapet. So there's probably a double wall here. So a full height wall here and then a parapet wall back here so they can, but all that's not necessarily important for this exercise. So anyway, yeah.
Stuff like wall types and framing types is covered more specifically in the book. So like a load bearing wall is probably going to look different than a non-load bearing wall. I'm just assuming.
In Revit, you would have to define it yourself. So you don't necessarily need it to look different, but you would probably call it out different in your wall types. You could make it different here, but you can see on our example, I think she just has the exterior walls are assumed to be load bearing, and then your interior partitions. Often architects will put load bearing in the title, and again for residential it's usually not. It's pretty they don't always use the standards, but in a commercial building, they'll often specifically have these wall types. They'll also have the UL, the Underwriters Laboratory, listing for fire rating, so that they're a lot more specific. And you could definitely see on structural drawings, a lot of times that's where you will see the load bearing and non-load bearing walls. They likely will not draw the load bearing walls, or the non-load bearing walls, sorry. They'll just leave those as kind of grayed out from the architect, and then they'll put markers for their shear walls and for their different types of walls in the structural. So you'll see that mostly in the structural drawings.
Okay.
But yeah, that's mostly done in commercial. Residential, it just varies on the person.
Okay. And then a pretty specific question here. I wanted to try and do my building with steel framing rather than wood.
Oh, yes.
Is that something I have to do from the beginning, or can I essentially go through the project and then alter that later?
Yeah, definitely. So you could alter that later. So for instance, I think I went over that in one of the videos this week, but if not, we can go over here again. Oh, and just real quick, to get rid of this CAD file that I imported, always using the quick commands. You can go to Manage Links, which I believe is on the Insert tab. Manage Links, yes. And so anything that you link in here will be here. So you can go in here and then remove it. I just deleted it. But if you've made changes in your CAD file, you want to reload it, you'd need to go to your Manage Links on the Insert tab, click on it, and then hit Reload. to reload any changes. So if you have a background, it would update.
Okay.
But so right now I have so for this week, I started with the kind of the base floor. I added a bunch of windows, and then I added floor joists using a beam system family. And so the nice thing about Revit is I'm going to open up the structural 3D view I have here. And let's make this the entire screen. So you go to view, to tab views. And let's just turn off these windows because they're just floating in space in this view. So I have this 2x9 or 2x10 joists that are on here that I created with the beam system family. So if you highlight the beam system family outline, and I wanted to change these to wide flange steel beams or C channels or anything else, as long as you have the family loaded in, you can change these to this preloaded 12x26 wide flange beam. So now I've got a steel structure in here instead of the wood structure. So that is pretty easy to change once you've started. Okay. If you've done any manual changes, because often you'll lay all these out. For instance, I had this bump out for this bay window that I didn't initially model when I first did my first run on the floor plan. And I may have to do some manual beam placements, then you'll want to, then you might have to do some manual changing. But on this first few weeks, we're just really, the idea is just to get the, just your basic elements in to show that you have the wall, the floor plans, the window locations. And as we go through the weeks, we'll just continue to refine it and add more detail. So your first pass could just be anything as a placeholder. And again, in here, we'll have to add, so on my floor plan, I'll have to add additional supports to support these spans, because in the book we can read where they actually have some span tables that we can use as just, general basis for how far joists and things can span, so that we're not doing something so unrealistic. So, but once everybody gets their books, we can start looking at that. And again, because we can change it so easily. So let's say if we do our framing plan, let's see. So if I were to tag all these beams, change the scale so the tags aren't huge, I can go to annotate, tag by category. Actually, no, I want to tag all. And then I'll just select structural framing tags. So anything that's considered structural framing, like beams and girders and those things, it's going to put a tag on there and hit OK. It will tag all of the beams and your joists. So if I were to change these like we did in that previous, and just a little bit ago, we can change these to that 12 by 26 wide flange beams, and all your tags will automatically update, because that's data that's stored within the beam family. So if you were to go to edit type, it's pulling that data from this section name key, I think. You'd actually have to look at the tag to see exactly where it's pulling that family. But again, we can go over some of that when we do our, we start getting into more detail.
Okay.
Is there any more questions before we get started?
I think I'm good until Wednesday.
Okay, yeah. Take a look at the videos and let me know. Obviously, I appreciate any input that you can give me, as comments and whatnot, so I can make sure I have the videos that are useful to you. And I'll just kind of, if anybody, oops, here's Wyatt. If anybody else wants to stay on, then we can just go over how I started laying out a floor plan, or anything else that anybody would like me to go over outside of those videos.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Hi, Wyatt.
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I had just had a problem with my computer because my computer was almost crashing, and it's getting pretty hard for me right now. So, what you learning this? What are we learning this week? Anything special?
Yeah, we're going to learn how to turn our reference plans that we made last week and start modeling those in Revit.
Oh,
So have you been able
Okay.
to, I asked everybody else to see if have you been able to, did you watch all the videos, lectures last week? Particularly the ones at the end of the week with the kind of the Revit, kind of intro to Revit and the walls and the elevation tags and detail levels, inserting a title block. Were you able to?
No. Yeah. No, I haven't. I should go look into that and see what's in store for it. Should be fun. I know how to get through there.
Okay, yeah. So on Wednesday I have intro to Revit, and then last Friday I have 3 Revit videos kind of in preparation for this week, and then this week, hey, look, somebody's already done a design for him. This week we have some more specific videos going through how to lay out the floor plan. So I was going to go if nobody had any other specific questions, I was going to go over how I'd start, and then you can ask some questions and then watch the videos too, and hopefully the combination will help you guys get a good start on it this week.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, are you good? So yeah, I'll bring up my file and kind of show how I started. Let's see, was this? Yeah.
Joseph, I just wanted to say that I sent that information. So I just used the information that you sent in the email back to the Bluebeam person.
Oh yeah.
So and then you wanted to know our major. So I was able to get that sent off. But
Oh yeah, and so I forwarded, because I got that email, I actually got 2 of them because I signed up twice because they never sent like a confirmation email that says, hey, your request has been received. You just got it. You sent off that information and nothing happened. So I sent them a couple different emails just asking, we haven't heard anything back. I wanted to make sure that you guys registered our request. And so I forwarded those off to Rick too, just because in the email I got, they'd asked if we needed a CAD lab license as well, in anticipation that going back to school sometime next year or this year, hopefully, but sometime in the future. And so Rick was saying that he wants to try to get Lance involved so that we can so that he can control the licensing. So Lance is going to start doing that too. I would continue down the path that you're doing, but just and I'm going to do the same thing because I don't want to be in 30 days and trying to do work and be surprised that my trial ran out. So, but I think in the future he's going to try to get and I'm not sure what that looks like, because it sounds like you guys are using, you had to do the same process for Autodesk, right? You kind of went about it yourselves to get a license. So let's see, what did Rick say? He said basically enlisting Lance's help, the IT guy, to see if he can get something that, is controlled by him so that we could get licenses from him instead of trying to do all this funky download dance each term.
right.
Next term, we're going to be using the same software, so it shouldn't be an issue for next class, but definitely in the future, it'd be nice to not have to fight with downloads and all that.
Yeah, it looks like all of the student ones from their description are yearly. Like in August, they stop, and then you just have to reapply for it in time for it to come in. That's just the student one. Looks like the educator one's probably pretty consistent. But the student one, it says, you just have to reapply for the next school year, and it seems like they're pretty open about letting you reapply again, as long as you're still in school and doing the major. So
awesome. Cool. Well, thank you for forwarding that too. And I'm glad that they finally responded. So at least we know we're not going to be.
right.
floating in the wind, as it were.
So, do we all have to send the contact information? Because I got the same email and I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. So let me, I will forward, it should be on my email signature, but I don't have my email signature to send every time I reply. So I will send out a mass email.
Katie, I think every person who gets the email has to reply back separately so they know who your teacher is and what program you're using it for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I was just wondering if it was going to have a license in his name and then we'd get the license from him, or.
That's
Yeah,
probably going to be in the future. Yeah. But
I think what it'll be that they're like, okay, this student's connected to LBCC through this teacher right now. And then that way in their system, they know who's who and what for what free trial or free student access we have.
Okay.
They'll probably send them out that way. And then we'll each receive our own, but at least they can connect it to who is using it and what student.
Okay, cool.
Probably because they either get a tax write-off or there's probably something in their system, but they have to keep really close track of that.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure all the information, it's just in your signature.
yeah, and I'm going to send out an email. And what is is it the CAD Tech program? What is your degree, or what's the other thing they ask for?
It just said your information. Oh, let me see.
And your major?
Yeah, it asks for the instructor's information and the student's major.
Yeah.
And I guess that might be different for each of you, possibly, right? Because somebody's going through, are you, Crystal or Katie, going through the graphic design program, or you're just kind of filling in?
Yeah, I'm doing the graphic design program, but that's separate. Right now, my main major is the CAD Tech program.
Gotcha.
With
And
the
for you,
civil on the side.
and for Wyatt, it would be probably, since you're through Chemeketa's system, and if you used your Chemeketa account to sign up for Bluebeam, you probably want to put the major through Chemeketa.
Okay.
If you use the LBCC one, you probably use the major from LBCC. I'm not sure. If they give you, I doubt that there's going to be any issues, but if they give you any issues, that might be. Did you sign up with LBCC or Chemeketa student email? Do you remember?
I think I signed up with my Chemeketa account to download Revit. You know.
Right, but for Bluebeam, and you might not have gotten the email for the student license yet. Because
I don't think so.
So if you get that email for the student license, I'm sending out an email now because they ask for the instructor information and then they'll ask for your major.
Okay. Okay.
Cool. Thank you, Wyatt.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll kind of go over what I went over in the video for the first day this week about how to start laying out your floor plan. Has everybody watched the wall type videos? On how to create a wall type and edit a wall type? I think Wyatt, you said you hadn't watched any videos. What about anybody else?
I actually didn't see those until you just mentioned them. I was checking Moodle from my phone this weekend because it was my husband and nephew's birthday parties and I was busy doing stuff for that. So I was checking like different assignments on Moodle and that actually didn't show up from my phone. So I actually got on today and hadn't looked at it till just now that the week 1-3 had actually shown up. So I haven't watched those yet. I was going to actually log off and go watch those really quick and then watch this later if you were going over it again to see if I missed anything.
Oh, okay.
But thank you. So I'm going to go watch those and then I'll come back and see if anybody else had questions. I don't know about anybody else, but
Okay.
Have a good evening, guys.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
So in the video, if I recall, I started off by, so I don't know what your process is in CAD. Typically, when I'm using AutoCAD, I'm not gonna, yeah, whatever. Stupid CAD licensing stuff. So in AutoCAD, I typically start with the construction lines, and I'll draw basically the boundaries for the drawing that I'm going to start. And I'll start by offsetting lines to create whatever geometry I'm creating. And so Revit is similar. So when I start, if I'm not using a CAD background, I will start typically by using either detail lines, which is the nice thing about Revit too, and I think CAD does a similar thing. If you hover over it, it'll tell you what it is. The detail lines basically do not show up in any other view. So whatever view you draw them, they are only going to show up in that view. So if I were to draw a line here, if I go to the 3D view or any other view, it's not going to show up. And we'll turn off these other views so that we can see. So you don't see a line here. If you go into the architecture tab, there's also model lines. They are, I'll change, oh, that already has changed. I'll change that to hidden line. And as you can see, model lines actually are to some extent a 3D geometry, right? It shows up in all the views. It creates a, zero thickness layer line that you can see in a 3D view. Often I might use that in a coordination model to outline an area or a question that I have, so that when I export a model for 3D coordination, they can see it. And so if you wanted to see your lines in the view, in a 3D view, now this will show up in the elevation view, except these model lines, because they are just a point, we'll grab it over here. And you can see, you can't see it because I don't even know if you could zoom in enough to see the model line because it is got a zero thickness. So you wouldn't be able to see those in all of your, and you wouldn't be able to necessarily see them in a section or a elevation, but they actually are there as like a zero thickness line. They show up obviously in a plan view or a 3D view. And so those are two types of lines that you can use in Revit. So if you wanted to lay out your overall plans, you could either use one of these model lines, and you'd have to think that it's going to show up in your 3D view. Obviously you can delete them later, or you can turn them off in your visibility graphics. So in your visibility graphics, if you go to lines, hit the little plus, you can actually turn off. I think that was a hidden line. And then so if you did have 3D lines, you could hide them so they don't show up in a view if you didn't want to. And then the third line it's not really a line per se, it's a reference plane. So on the same tab is the architectural tab. And over here it's called a reference plane. They're like a 3D line, except that they will not show up in your 3D views, but they will show up in, let's do one. Actually, we can go to this section here. I often like to use reference planes because they show up in all your different views. So we have the south elevation, and these reference planes are kind of like construction lines in AutoCAD, whereas to some extent, they kind of extend out in all both directions, so you could see them on the plan, and then you see these construction lines also in the elevation view. And if we were to open this section, you can see these reference planes here. So what I did to start my drawing is, because my overall dimensions were basically to the deck. So I've got deck to deck here and deck to garage face here. So that's what was my known dimensions I was starting with. And then I was taking dimensions to work back to where actually my building starts. So I set my reference planes to those dimensions. So I've got the reference planes set to the 84 feet and then the 55 or 56'6" in this direction. So that's typically how I'll start a plan, by having some kind of reference lines. And you could use one of those three lines: the detail line, which only shows up in the one view, a model line, or a reference plane. Reference planes, because they are kind of a 3D element, but doesn't necessarily show up in all the view in like a 3D view. It won't export as an entity. And actually, that's not entirely true. If you go to print, depending on your print setup, it's default to hide the reference and work planes. So potentially you could unhide the reference planes, but that's typically not customary to have all these reference planes. Some projects you'll see reference planes going all over the place. You can also name a reference plane. So if we could just call this test. Reference planes are also things that can be set as a work plane. So if you're doing, trying to set, so like if I were to draw a reference plane horizontally for some element that I wanted to use in the section or elevation, I could name it test 2, and then the same place we put a reference plane, we can set our reference plane. Either pick the reference plane or a level or a grid, or we can pick a plane. So if we wanted just to use this sill as a plane, we could pick that reference plane, or we could set the reference plane to one of these, or set the work plane to one of these reference planes. And it might often ask you to go to a different view to be able to set that. And then we'll pick a plane and then hit show plane, and then it's showing this reference plane. And that reference plane is this one that we set at this kind of test reference plane line. And you can see over here, when we hit show reference plane, you can see the name is that test 2 of that reference plane we just set. So if we were to start drawing any elements in here, let's turn off the reference plane so that we don't have to see it. If you were to start a wall, and actually it looks like it's not doing that, but it should. Often when you set a reference plane, it will automatically set it to that. Typically I work with reference planes in the 3D view. So if I were to set my work plane as this test 2, you know why? I think it's because the walls typically are controlled by levels. So if we were to go to a beam, I'm hoping that it's going to set the beam at the reference plane. No, interesting. Oh no, it did. Okay. Phew. I thought I was losing my mind here, because that's how I show you to place this top plate on the foundation walls, by setting the reference plane to the top of the wall. So anyway, that was actually probably a little rabbit hole of stuff I kind of go over a little bit later, about how to start, creating an outline for your floor plan. And so what I did was then created my lines. And you can see when you select a line, it's going to give you kind of a temporary dimension. And so what do we say? 84 foot was the width of mine. So you can set those kind of exterior boundaries, 5'6", of your floor plan. In Revit, I'm going to go just to check. So 55, 6, and 84 feet. So, and another thing I think I covered in the videos too, if you have a dimension, if you go to annotate, pick a dimension, you can change the type of dimension up here. But when you place a dimension, you can actually control elements in your model by picking the element you want to modify, and you can just change the dimension. So if I wanted to make that 50 feet, it will pull that back. So we'll make that 84 feet. So when I create, so now I've kind of got my exterior boundaries. And let me know if you guys want to hop off or anything, or if I'm going over something you're not interested in, because at this point we have the videos, or stop me if you have questions as well. So you can start by going to Architecture tab and choosing an architectural wall. We'll bring up the last wall you created. If you haven't created a wall, it typically brings up this generic 8-inch wall, which is fine. You can, it's kind of like what we talked about earlier about creating the beams. Anything that we generate in Revit, we can easily modify later. So like I said, I have about 8 feet off of this kind of outside deck. So when I'm going to place this wall, a couple things to note before you place a wall. Similar to like where we set the work plan, walls are controlled by levels. And so if you look up here on the top, the wall is going to have the base constraint at level 1, and it's going to go up in height up to level 2, and that'll be the top connection. You can modify that up here or down here on the properties palette. Also, the next thing that's pretty important is the location of the wall. So for here, we have it set to finish face exterior, and that's how I'm gonna have it set to start out. And the other thing you can do, and so that means when I place a wall, the location line is where these nodes are, these grips. Oops. And these grips designate where this location line exists at. So this is considering this the exterior face of the wall. So if I were to do the center line, as you can see, the little grips or the nodes will change to the center, and interior finish face will change this over here. That's important for when you modify the wall later. If I were to change this wall type to this 2x6 wall, it's going to hold this position here, and it's going to pull this wall towards this location or push it away from this location line. So whatever wall type we change it to, that's where it's going to push your wall. So if you have all of your walls, so for instance, let's start over again. I'm going to set my perimeter. I'm going to set it 8 feet off that reference plane we just drew. And as you can see, when I pick, it's gonna place that offset of that line. If you hit space, it'll toggle it back and forth. And so you can pick and place that line, and now that wall is 8 feet from that, well, showing 7, 8 to the center, so it placed it 8 feet to the face here. However, I want it to be 8 feet to the finish face. It's kind of hard to tell when you have this generic wall. And so if you wanted to use, I made this, the wall type that I'm going to use. So let's use that for an example. So we have the 8-foot offset, so we can actually see what side the layers are on. Oops. All right, let's place this wall again. interestingly, so it's, oh, that's the other thing too about walls. So it's, if you draw it from the top down, it's going to place it a different way than if you're going to do from the bottom up. So the way you place a wall is also matters as well. Let's see. So for some reason, it's still placing that finish face. I think it's setting this finish face 8 feet off of the reference plane that way. I'm going to try something else here. So actually, I gave it a value of -8. And so what it's doing is it's giving, because I gave it a value of -8, it's taking that exterior face of finish of this wall and putting it 8 feet from this reference plane. Sorry if this is a little confusing. Honestly, typically when I draw in Revit, I'll draw the walls and then I'll just hit space or hit this little button to flip them so they're in the right direction. I don't necessarily worry about if they're in the right orientation when I initially place them, but I thought it'd be good for you to know exactly, like if you wanted to place this wall with the exterior finish side out, you'd have to give it a negative value from whatever you're offsetting from, if that makes sense. So we can do that again, give it an -8 foot value and see if it's going to try to put it in the right spot. And it did. So I'm trying to basically get this corner down here set that will be the start of my building. So in the modify tab, I think I went over in the video, it's kind of a little bit different than CAD. This trim extend corner under the modify tab is basically like fillet for AutoCAD. And then trim extend is similar to the trim extend command in AutoCAD. So, but you'll want to trim corner or basically fillet this corner to get the corner. And then basically I've gone through and I typically will just quickly draw in all of my walls to be somewhat like what I know the floor plan to be.
What was that command?
Which one? The trim command?
Okay, it is just trim.
Yeah, so if you go to the modified tab, it is the trim corner, trim extend corner.
I tuned out right when you said that, and I was like, okay, got it.
Yeah, not to be confused with the trim extend single element, which is more like trim extend in AutoCAD, where the trim extend corner is really more of like a fillet command.
Okay, got it.
Although the fillet or the trim extend corner doesn't allow you to give a radius, but that's neither here nor there. That's a different program, so we'll let that slide. So then typically what I'll do is get my building set up by taking these dimensions. And so I saw this is about 52 feet across here. I will add dimensions. Select the wall and then change the dimensions to those values. If you have multiple monitors, I like to work with multiple monitors. I say the more monitors, the merrier. I think I have 4 at work. I only have 2 at home, which is kind of a bummer.
I can get behind that. I got 3 and it doesn't feel like enough.
I know. I tried to actually get, I think, set up with a 5th monitor at work, and the video card or something didn't have another input. And I tried to like daisy chain them because you could do that. And I think we ended up determining that the video card was not able to handle that many. So And I asked my boss if I could get a better video card. When you have emails and PDFs and even multiple projects, so if you get a job in any job but a job in construction, you typically have several projects you're working on, and so you're bouncing from one to the other, and it's time consuming to open and close, especially really sizable files. So having a computer that can handle having multiple sessions of Revit open and all that stuff, and being able to have multiple monitors so you can, reference back to your reference drawings, to shop drawings, to the construction drawings, and then your Revit model and your CAD files. I always push. They make fun of me at work for that because I think I kept pushing for more monitors because it just makes your workflow so much easier.
Yep. What I need to get is a new computer for. I'm gonna be building a new computer, and I'm gonna have a more work-based graphics card.
Oh, nice.
The one I got now is great for some stuff, but I've put it to its knees a couple times with some Civil 3D stuff.
Oh yeah, I know the Civil 3D is pretty demanding software too, isn't it?
Topographic maps can cripple 128 gigs of RAM, apparently.
Wow. Yeah, and I know we've had to work with some point cloud models where we've had surveyors go out and they take the 3D scan.
Yeah.
And you can actually, if you go to insert, I'm not sure who was asking about but you can enter in point clouds, which
Nice.
can be super fun and super frustrating. So I had working on the Apple campus down in Cupertino, and they did this theater, and everything in Apple is round, which is super frustrating because it's not always fun to work with the the round. And so they wanted it carved. I think it was marble. So they have all the walls were like marble down there, and they wanted to carve the handrail into the marble wall panels, which we did. Well, we didn't do it, but we designed the support for it. But they had a shotcrete concrete wall, which was like within a 1-inch tolerance. So we're trying to connect to a wall that, as you know, concrete tolerance isn't that great. It can be off within 1 inch of where the drawings say.
Yeah.
And so we had to connect to that, but to size our connections, we actually needed to know where that concrete wall was. So it was pretty cool. They did a point cloud inside of there to see the whole concrete wall. You could see a guy walking around with the point cloud. In the point cloud, you could see scaffolding and a forklift, I think, and then the concrete wall. We were able to put it in on the plan and kind of get the minimum and maximum spacing at the area so that we could kind of design our anchors with some tolerance in them as well, so that we didn't design an anchor that was too big and would push the stone out, because Apple wants everything
As clean as possible.
Exactly. That's their whole thing. A really nice, clean look. So that's I'll have to find some pictures of that. That was pretty fun. Pretty fun, and can be frustrating at times project. So
yeah.
But I don't know. I imagine most people who go into this field it's almost like putting a puzzle together. You're taking all these different pieces and you're putting them together. And it's just like a big puzzle, and it's kind of fun to do it. So I really enjoy it. So as I was just looking at this garage, and this is pretty self-explanatory, kind of just throwing dimensions on and matching the widths to what you've pulled off of your drawing, which is why I wanted it to be scalable. Now, feel free to make any changes that you want. So if you wanted to make, if you're a car guy or motorcycle guy or an ATV guy, and you wanted to, in your house, you wanted to make a bigger garage and have like an extra space for work, modify the plans to do whatever you want. It's kind of why we're doing this design forum each week, so that we can start looking at the things and you're like, oh no, I really like that. To have that in the garage, like maybe, I've seen them. We've done them in San Francisco where they've got the parking, I don't know even what do you call it, but it's like it's like a parking elevator. So you park your car in there and it like lifts your car up so the next person can park in there.
Like a vending machine.
Yeah. And
I've
so
seen those before. Yeah.
that'd be cool. Like if you were an ATV guy or motorcycle guy, or it'd be cool to have like something so you could have everything out of the way, and have a miniature one in there. So for me, doing this, I would like to have fun and adding things like that. But feel free to modify. This is again just as a reference. You don't have to be hard and fast to any dimensions or even any layout. If you wanted to modify anything in your plans, they're just as a guideline. Feel free to modify to whatever you want, as long as you can end up detailing it at the end of the day. That's pretty much all that matters for me. So, and again, I'm just going through and modifying the floor plan so you probably get it. And that is basically you just work around the building. And so my first step was to do that. The next step that I did, and this, and I went over in the video, was we talked about in the first place, making sure that all of your walls are set to the same thing, so that the location line is the exterior face of finish and that it's on the correct side, so that your location line is in the right spot. Because what happens is if, like, let's say this is not in the right spot and I select all these walls and I change the dimension to something else, it might push it in or out the wrong way. And then as you can see here, the finish is on the wrong side. And so it's important to kind of go through and make sure that it's set up. Not that that's detrimental, but it just makes it easier as you're going through to make sure that you've got the location line in the right location. And as you can see, I have all these exterior dimensions that I took off of my plan for what I'm considering face of finish. If I were to change it back to the wall type that I wanted, it holds all my dimensions because I have this set to the finished faces exterior. So it's not changing my outside dimensions because of this location line setting. So in the inverse, so if I wanted to change everything to the finished face interior, now all of the walls are set to finished face interior. If I were to change this wall type, it's going to push everything out and make all my dimensions on the outside smaller because it took the finished face of interior and push that to the exterior. As you can see, is my dimensions updated to show that. And this one actually pushed it way past my exterior boundary because that end of the wall was lined up with my reference plane. So, but it's pretty easy just to grab them all again. You'd want to change it back to your wall type. So if I would have changed the location line first, and this might be self-explanatory, it's going to actually pull everything back to that new face. And so you're gonna get your dimensions messed up because it's holding that exterior face. So what you want to do, change it back, keep it at the finished face interior, and then modify it so it kind of goes back to the right place. And then don't forget to change it back to finished face exterior so that you can hold all of your dimensions. And so I will look at this last dimension. We'll just call that 5 feet and 40'6". Theoretically, when I pull this dimension, it should be close to 40'6", and it is. So that's perfect. It's like the leftover is 13 feet. And we can throw a quick dimension on here to see if we get something close to that on the floor plan, and we do. So that's kind of how you can back check to see if you're at least close to your reference plan. So the next thing, I think in the video I started with a generic wall type. So we can go and look to see how I actually modified the wall types. So the wall types in Revit let's see here. So the first thing is I want to change all these wall types, whatever wall type I'm going to be using. You can either hit edit type on the properties panel and change this wall type globally altogether and just rename it. So if you hit edit type, you could just rename it because you're probably not going to use, oops, did I change that? Let's go to edit type. You know, you're probably not going to use your generic 8-inch family, so it's probably okay just to rename it and call it your exterior wall. But if you wanted to keep this wall type, there's duplicate. So we'll just duplicate this and call it exterior wall. And there's no content you can really modify in this initial screen. You can give it some assembly codes and a type mark for tagging later on. You'll want to hit this structure tab. And that's going to bring you into another screen that you can modify your actual wall type assembly and how it's put together. So over here, you can hit preview. Sorry, I didn't show you that. So preview. We'll show you the preview of the wall and plan, and then you can change it to section. So here we have a generic structure. So the wall types work between the core boundary is your structure boundaries. So if you were to try to put a finish, I don't think it'll let you do that, but let's see. Nope, it actually let us do that. I was thinking that I gave a warning. So many warnings pop up in Revit. It's hard to remember, but this is a core boundary. So when we were looking at this before, you can see that core face and core face exterior and core face interior options as well. And so anything inside of this core boundary, that's what it'll consider. So typically when you lay out a wall type, we're doing a 5.5-inch wood stud wall, we'll do our structure between the core boundary. Oh, hit insert down here and then move it to the either exterior side or the interior side. So layers above the core boundary on the top will be the exterior side. Layers below will be on the interior side. So on here, I'm going to actually add another layer. I'm going to call it substrate, which will be my plywood layer. So typically exterior walls will be sheathed with 1/2-inch or 3/4-inch plywood. I think probably typically 1/2-inch in residential. Even a lot of commercial applications, I think I see hotels and often are the 15-30 seconds in structural plywood. So you'd change the function to substrate and then change the thickness here. And so now we'll have a 1/2-inch, dang it, I hate it when I do that. We'll have a 1/2-inch layer on our little preview here. We'll call that substrate again. Just got to remember not to hit escape. And we can see that in our preview as we start building this wall. These material categories we can define as from our material browser. So if you click on the little ellipses here, it'll bring up your material browser, and we can set it to any specific material one. So in this, I'm going to do softwood lumber. And you can see this is the properties that it's going to add to this wall type layer. In the video, I actually go over how to change these, but it's pretty self-explanatory. You just click on them to do the color. In a wall type, you'll have a cut pattern, which is what it'll look like when it's cut. And then you'll have a surface pattern, which is what it'll look like if you were to see it in an elevation or 3D view. For this, because this is going to be a stud, you're never going to see this surface pattern. It's going to be behind layers of plywood and sheetrock. So I don't set that on this particular layer. On here, we can set the cut pattern. And you can see there's a bunch of cut patterns. You can also create your own cut pattern and also import cut patterns as well. There's two types of fill patterns as well. There's a drafting pattern and a model pattern. The drafting pattern will scale. So if you go to a larger or smaller scale, that will change in size. Model patterns, which are not selectable for this particular view, will not scale. They will not scale. So we'll go into like a surface pattern will allow you to use these model patterns. So a model pattern, so I did this for the lap siding. I use 6-inch parallel lines. So no matter what scale I'm at, it will always be 6-inch lines, and you can actually modify that pattern on the elevation. So if you want the pattern to start at a certain location, similar to an AutoCAD where you can set a hatch boundary, you can set these lines. So the model lines will actually be physical lines in your model, where these drafting views will not. They'll just be a pattern that will grow larger or smaller depending on the scale. So that's kind of setting your material. And what that'll do is it will show up on your plan. So if we wanted to, particularly if you're doing a structural drawing, if you wanted your bearing walls to show up differently than your non-bearing walls, you might duplicate this pattern. You can right click and duplicate, or down here, you can duplicate, create new material. And so if we wanted to rename this to bearing and rename this to non-bearing. So in the bearing walls, you could define a different pattern, maybe give it a crosshatch or some other defining pattern. I don't have to look at the structural drawings to see if there's a typical bearing. So I think most structural drawings, now that I'm thinking about it, when I'm looking them up, usually they'll have a solid hatch for bearing walls and no hatch at all for non-bearing walls. But they will have a legend that tells you. So the structural drawings will typically say, show you which walls are bearing, which walls are not in the legend, so that you can, when you're looking at a plan, you can see what their purpose is. And we'll just use, again, it doesn't matter, but I like this diagonal crosshatch. We'll just call that a bearing. And actually, let's, I hate it escaping. Dang it. Duplicate, bearing, and we'll leave the same color. And so now it'll show a crosshatch, so we could distinguish our bearing walls. Or what might be even better is to just do a solid fill that's black. We don't need this pattern now because it wouldn't show up. And so now our bearing walls would have this solid black pattern. Any questions about the changing the materials and adding these layers for the wall type so far? Alrighty, I'll add another layer here for siding. Let's call it finish 1. I'm going to add, because I'd already kind of created these when I was doing my lecture video, I'll add this 6-inch lap siding, and I'll show you what I meant by the difference between the model and the, and so another thing to note, Revit is kind of nice in a lot of aspects, is that you don't have to scroll to find things you're looking for. You can just type up here in the search bar. So if I'm looking for gypsum wallboard, I can type up here and it will search and filter out anything that doesn't start with gypsum. So that makes it nice. So I've got a nice sand hatch. I'm going to create another layer here, move it down for my interior gypboard. Actually, this was plywood, so we'll change that to plywood. And again, you can just start typing up at the top. plywood sheathing. See, I've already set the plywood sheathing to be this plywood pattern. And then this chipboard layer. Well, here's a 1/2 inch. And then actually I want to see something. I'm pretty sure if I leave this as a structure on outside of the core, nope, it's still not going to give me an error. I know there's some things you can do that if you try to add, and I can't remember what those are, but that's fine for me for right now. I don't really care. I prefer to not have errors when I'm trying to do modeling. So anyway, that's kind of a basic wall type that we can create and we can start with, or you can modify later on down the road as you see fit. And so now all of the wall types that were this generic 8-inch wall are now this wall type that we've created. And then one last thing you can do is go to rename and call it we'll call it exterior bearing wall. And so now we have our wall type. So it's pretty plain. And I know a lot of our, before I go on, here I was telling you about the difference between model lines and drafting lines in the wall type material. So this lap siding, I made a model pattern. Which allows me to actually physically tab in and be able to move the pattern wherever I want. So if I want the pattern to align with the head of this window, I can hit align, which is up here on the modify tab. Tab to get that surface, and then that line will now line up with that window head. As you can see, that'll work for just the wall that you're on, and then you'd have to go around and align all the rest of your patterns. For the align commands, you can hit multiple aligns. So if you've got a line that you want to align to, and you don't want to keep hitting the line, you can go through, hit multiple, and get all of your patterns to align. And it doesn't really matter which one you do because it's a pattern. So it's basically setting the origin. So it doesn't matter which line you pick, it will align it and everything else will fall into line with that, as it were. You can go around and align all of your patterns so that you're consistent across the building. And a thing to note, which can be super frustrating, is if you do not uncheck multiple align, it will be checked the next time you enter the align command and can cause some confusion and frustration. So just make sure to uncheck it before you enter the command. So next time you go in it, it is unchecked.
With the wall editing you were doing, like creating the wall, basically the different layers.
Yeah.
I cannot get the siding to be visible. Like it just shows my substrate layer and layers underneath.
In the preview or in the actual model, or?
In the preview, I see it. In the model, I do not.
What is your coarseness set to on your detail level? Is that set to, let's see, mine is showing coarse and it still shows up. Did you want to share your screen so we can see too, or?
Sorry, hold on. I'm finicking with stuff. I'm trying to get it to work.
Yeah.
Coarseness level should be at coarse, you said, or what should it be
coarseness level should be at medium or fine, but it seemed like mine, you can see when I set coarseness level, it loses some detail, and it kind of depends on the element. So that was one thing that I thought could be one reason. The other reason is to make sure you have it on the right layer. or the right layer is facing the right direction. So I look on the outside. So if you're in a 3D view, that's a little bit easier to see than if you're on an elevation, just to make sure that, like for instance, this wall, the exterior layer is faced out to this side. So if it got added to the other side, you might not be seeing the lines. There's like a lot of different reasons that you could not, I've got to find it. Somebody posted online like 100 different reasons why you might not see something in Revit, because there's just a lot of ways to control views, between filters, between design options, work sets, visibility graphics, the visibility graphics overrides that you can add, and filters on top of those, and the coarseness also too. If you create a section or elevation, it can be turned off by saying, like, let's say hide it at scales coarser than, you know, a certain scale, and it will actually not show up in that view. So that can be kind of frustrating. So now I told it to hide this section at scales coarser than a 3/8. And so now I have a section in here, but it doesn't show up because it's, yeah. So lots of different reasons things can't show up. So
I feel like I may have made the wall incorrectly, like in the assembler, in the edited, you know, screen, right? Added in the siding and stuff.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. Okay, hold on.
So when you set the foreground pattern, did you use a model instead of the drafting?
I used the drafting for both or all of them that I edited. Yes.
And as far as the drafting view, shouldn't matter so much, other than based on the scale, it might be. So I just change it to a drafting view of this hatch pattern. And so if I change the scale to a 1/2 inch, it makes it a much tighter pattern. But if I were to change it to like 1 inch equals 30 feet, the pattern is really big. And so like the plywood pattern on this floor, because it's a drafting, not a model pattern, will change.
You know what? I figured it out. Never mind. I had them in backwards. I got it.
Okay.
I had the finished side at the bottom of the list.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the bottom would be the interior.
Yeah. I was thinking of it as looking at it from one side. No, I got it. That was my bad.
No worries. You know what? I know what I do all day at work when I'm at work often is because for the most part, a lot of the stuff we've gone through is Revit. A lot of the projects, almost all of the reference materials we're getting are Revit files, but our design side has not switched over to Revit. And so basically some of these guys have been drafting in CAD for 20 years and now they're having to learn Revit. And so a lot of the day, especially when I'm at work, is either phone calls or people asking for help, because there's just so many different ways to turn off stuff and honestly screw things up in Revit, because it's not necessarily super intuitive sometimes. So a lot of my day is is fielding questions and helping people like go through exactly that. So
Yeah.
don't hesitate to reach out. I've been doing it for a long time, enough to know the 50 different ways that you might not be seeing something. So
Got it. All right. Well, I'm gonna take off and finish up the videos that I had started, and I guess